Hey squad, it's Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, as I said, doing a product update as I work on our next product, which is going to be Australia Oceania region. And I'm researching, which I'll probably be doing to the end of the year before we roll out our product next year. As I'm researching and things come to mind, or I learn things I want to share with you instead of wait for the end and try to remember it all. So I was just reading about European expansion in the South Pacific Islands, in the Polynesian dominated areas. And I thought it was really interesting, some information I came across. And it really goes back to why I'm such a macro person. I think micro is great for execution, but reason why I really lean heavily on the macro side is because I think scale can drown out execution, especially if you're dealing with like items. So what do I mean by that? I think if you're able to maximize something to its fullest potential, you're able to see those patterns. And if those patterns are properly carried out, it just leads to a favorable outcome. So I'll go deeper into that. One thing that I noticed in the South Pacific is you don't see the wars and melee that you see with Europeans, and this is primarily the colonial powers. For our purposes, let's just say Britain. But you don't see that in the other parts of the world, right? So it was a lot more violence, where you have the wars of the imperial powers such as Spain and Latin America and Portugal, across the coast of Africa, France and Haiti, the Americans and the United States. To some degree, you can say the Boers in South Africa as well. But you don't see this massive scale of antagonism and violence that you see in the South Pacific. And the reason for this, of course, there was, one, these islands are extremely small and not that intensely nurtured with resources. So they had that limited effect. But one thing I did notice is that it was the same effect. The Europeans came in, they were able to set up shop, develop colonies, and flourish and eventually dominate the land through law, language, pretty much culture, right? And the indigenous community kind of came into the fold. And a great example of this is what I'm seeing happened in New Zealand, where New Zealand you had your Maori communities, but the British just kept growing in population. And the reason why is because they were attracted by the opportunity of relative abundance, the resources at that time for their size, accessibility to commerce, etc. And it harkens back to this cultural model that I think is so important, that is so underrepresented in the education system. I think a lot of modern education revolves around heroes and villains, and I abhor that, because what it really should be around is about teaching people to make prudent and empowered choices of responsibilities to attain their ends. And to do this, you have to understand history. You have to understand history, but you can cite precedent to say, okay, this is what happened here, and this was the effect. And if I was to implement it X way, I can expect Y outcome. And it's hard to do that if you say X is good and Y is bad, or you make these flat out generic judgments. So with the culture of productivity, I think that the West, and I will say the West, as far as the most biggest components being America, the UK colonies, the Dutch, etc. I think Europe gets lumped in. Central and Eastern Europe had a completely different history. But these selling powers, what they would do is they set up a model where people were rewarded for production. I have so many things that I have to throw out. I tell people, I just went to a birthday party, and I said, look, don't worry about the gifts. And the reason why is because there is an abundance of material in America. Now, some people call it wealth and some people can call it junk when they're trying to get rid of it and clear out space. But there's an abundance, and that's because in America, in the West in general, you are rewarded for production, as opposed to a more old world economy where it was all based on control and access. You still have that in the West, but you have this extra layer of incentivization for productivity. People are rewarded for that, which allows extreme volatility in social classes. Because if you are someone like a Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, and you can be a very creative person with high productivity, you can shoot to the top echelons of society in a lifetime. In the old world, this was unheard of, especially in cultures such as the Americas, or Africa, or Asia, and at this time the South Pacific, where it was more about hierarchy as opposed to engaging. It was in the outside world, building those relationships and scaling it up. People were a lot more conservative. People usually functioned within their circle, and they had a respect for silos. And that respect was not shown by the Europeans during the age of colonization. So I wanted to say that because obviously it's this behavior, that ability to scale up and create. And I'll give you an example. In the South Pacific, these islands are on the far outreaches of the bulk of humanity on this earth. So they necessarily didn't have easy access to massive markets and the innovation that would come with that and the technology that would come with that. But when you're Westerners, Americans and British and French primarily went there, they were able to recognize opportunities such as well oil at one stage. It started off with small scale ship provisioning. That attracted some traders to want to get provisions from the indigenous communities to sell to the sailors. As the sailors came to that area because they were looking for well oil. Beyond that, coconut oil boom, and it was traders coming in to get access to the coconut oil to trade. And each time these traders come in, they bring more and more people settle, and this is how you get these colonies. And what they really were looking to do, these colonies, was to isolate themselves where they can have the ability to act in autonomy. They didn't want some traditional indigenous chief running their trade. So they were actually trying to separate their communities as opposed to going in with the full intention of eradicating the population. Sometimes this did happen because of diseases, etc. And sometimes it's happened through war. But that's the point. I didn't see that full-scale genocidal level of war in New Zealand to that degree. It was conflicts, but not to a massive intentional scale. It was more about the Europeans, the British primarily, getting in, setting up shop. And when they couldn't sell well oil, they moved to coconut oil. And the coconut oil was sold for wares such as soap and candles. And then when that came out of favor, then they invested in something else. They brought in sheep, and now they're selling wool. And New Zealand right now is the premier export destination for dairy. So it takes a lot of creativity. Like, these are people that's constantly looking at the land, constantly surveying it because they need something to produce, because they live in a society that rewards production. When you look at any country or nation that is struggling economically, you should look at their culture and see if their culture is conducive to a productive mindset. If you won't get rewarded for your productivity, there's low incentive for the indigenous people to be productive, or the nationals to be productive. Based on what people are incentivized to do, they will do so. And the reason why you see this abundance of wealth in the Western nations is because they are highly incentivized. And there are sacrifices for this, such as quality of life, but they are highly incentivized to produce. And therefore, the world is abundant, and you will have far more than you need, because we want limitless things. But we, as human beings, as the finite souls that we are, we only need few things. So I say this a lot because it shows how much culture goes into play for economic development. You know, you can only grow in an environment that suits that lifestyle. So that's my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Just an interesting point of view I came across and I wanted to share with you. Comment below, like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, take care. Bantu up.